My son drained my bank account and took his wife and her mother to Rome. I just smiled to myself, and 3 days later he called me sobbing. Mom, what did you do? My retribution was complete. The day I needed to breathe the most was the very day my son took every single dollar without even leaving a note. Eleanor, Ellie Price, froze for a long time. She sat on her old, worn cloth armchair, the same one she bought when Jackson turned 7 using the first decent paycheck she earned cleaning homes in the Hollywood Hills. In front of her, the cell phone screen glowed with a notification that chilled her blood. Available balance, $0. She read it again and a fourth time. Her hands trembled, not from old age, though she was 68 years strong, but from something deeper, a sickening knot that forms when the soul understands, but the heart refuses to accept. She called the bank. A robot answered. Then a human representative tried to ask questions. They told her the movements had been made online, wire transfers for large amounts, totaling over $80,000. It was her entire life's work, her savings, her security, her only safety net. And where did the money go? She asked, her voice broken, as if she knew the answer but needed to hear it from someone else. It was all transferred to an account in the name of Jackson Arthur Price, the executive replied indifferently. Ma'am, do you want to file a fraud report? Ellie didn't respond. She hung up without saying a word. Silence filled the house. The only sounds were the ticking of the clock in the kitchen and the buzz of a dying fluorescent light bulb. Then the landline rang. It was Doris, her longtime neighbor. Ellie? Ellie, honey, did you see your Jackson's Instagram? He's in Rome, child, eating fancy food with his wife and mother-in-law. Lord, what a life they live. They look like movie stars. Ellie swallowed hard. Her soul seemed to leave her body for an instant. She searched for her son's profile. There he was, Jackson, her only son, the boy she brought into the world with pain and raised alone. He was smiling, a glass in hand, embracing Tanya, his wife, and Rhonda, the mother-in-law who always looked down her nose at Ellie. The photo caption read, "Rome, my new beginning. I deserve this." And in the comments, Tanya had written, "Good things come to those who wait. Thanks for everything, Mama-in-law," with a money emoji. Ellie didn't cry. She didn't scream or break anything. She just stood there, holding the phone like a burning brick. Then, without anyone to notice, she smiled. But it was a different kind of smile, as if she finally understood something she had avoided seeing for years. The walls of Ellie's house seemed older that night. Everything was in its place, but nothing felt the same. On the shelf were photos of Jackson, small in preschool, in his first middle school uniform, the day he received his college diploma. Everything she did for him. At 18, she sold her engagement ring to pay for his high school. At 23, she gave him the family land her daddy left her. At 30, she helped with the wedding expenses, even though Tanya never cared for her. Ellie cooked for him, washed his clothes, and cleaned up after him, and he only drifted further away. "Mom, you don't understand this world," he'd say, dismissively. "Things aren't done like they used to be. Tanya and I have big plans. And I, son, am I part of those plans? You'll always be in my heart, Mama, but you can't be tied to me for life." 1 week before discovering the betrayal, Ellie had tried to visit Jackson at his apartment in Studio City. She brought a tray of her famous fried chicken and collard greens that she made herself. She rang the bell. No one opened the door. She waited under the sun, sitting on a bench for 2 hours, until the doorman approached her. "Are you looking for Mr. Jackson Price?" "Yes, I'm his mother." "Ah, well, I was instructed not to let you in if you come unannounced." Ellie swallowed. "And why is that?" "I couldn't tell you, ma'am, but that's what they told me." She walked back home. She didn't take the metro bus. She wanted the air to hit her face, even if it was hot and dirty. She thought of every meal she denied herself, every dawn she worked overtime, every penny she saved for her son. That same night, Doris came to visit. "You've always been strong, Ellie. Don't let this break your heart. Jackson is young. Maybe he'll come to his senses." Ellie sighed, her gaze distant. "Do you think children ever regret it?" Doris: "Yes, of course they do. When their mother isn't around, they realize everything." "Well, I hope it's not too late when he realizes." "And what are you going to do?" Ellie looked up. In her eyes was something different, something that hadn't been there before. "I'm going to smile, just like they taught me." Doris frowned. "Smile? What do you mean?" "I've cried enough, Doris. Now I'm going to smile in silence because I have nothing left to lose. And when a woman has nothing left to lose, she becomes dangerous."
Far away, under a cloudy sky and among the cobblestone streets of Rome, Jackson raised his glass without guilt. "See?" Tanya said, sipping expensive wine. "It was a good idea to take the money. She's going to die soon anyway. Better we use it before it goes to medical bills." Rhonda, her mother, let out a harsh laugh. "Clueless old lady. She doesn't even know what a plane is. She was never going to do anything useful with that cash." Jackson didn't say anything. He looked at the Colosseum with shining eyes, but something was churning inside him. But he kept quiet, just as he had learned to do since he was a boy and was hungry, and his mother would tell him, "Hold on, baby, we'll have it tomorrow." Years passed, and Tanya had gained ground. First, she asked that Ellie not visit so often, then that she not voice opinions on their decisions, finally that she not attend certain family events because she didn't fit in. Jackson, confused and lovesick, slowly distanced himself. "Honey, why does your mother always have to have an opinion on everything?" Tanya had said while doing her nails. "I don't want our child to grow up surrounded by poverty-level thinking. It's not control, it's pity disguised as love. Women like your mother think they're martyrs for raising kids alone, but they don't realize that the past doesn't give them the right to drag others down." Jackson accepted everything. Every time Ellie asked why they didn't visit, he lowered his head. "We have too many things going on, Mom. You know, work, wedding things." But Ellie began to notice things. A bank receipt that didn't match, a statement that never arrived. That's when she decided to talk to Walter, an old childhood neighbor and a retired lawyer. "Walter, how can I find out if someone is using my name for strange things?" Walter looked at her carefully. After weeks of reviewing documents, he invited her to his house. "Ellie, your son put you as a guarantor on a joint account. You didn't sign anything, but the signature is there." "But I don't know how to write more than my name." "They forged your signature, Ellie, and they've been taking money out little by little for 6 months." Ellie said nothing. She took the papers, put them in her purse, and left in silence. That night, the pain didn't let her sleep, not because of the money, but because of the truth. Her son hadn't just been manipulated, he'd become an active part of the betrayal. He robbed his own mother. Meanwhile, in Rome, Jackson was stepping out of the shower when he heard Tanya's voice on the balcony, speaking on the phone. "Yes, we did it. The old lady never even knew. The money's here. Tomorrow we open the account in Spain and we get rid of Jackson. Yes, of course he thinks we're in this together. Such a fool." Jackson stopped. He didn't move. He felt the water freeze on his skin. He didn't know yet that the worst was coming. Not even 3 days had passed since that discovery when Ellie received an unexpected call from Dr. Evans. "I need you to come in, Miss Eleanor. Today, if you can." She felt her legs tremble. She walked to the medical center with the same dignity with which she had faced everything in her life. She entered the office, her scarf tied tight, and the notebook where she wrote down every pill. The doctor greeted her kindly, but without hope.
We did new blood tests, and the results are not good. You have leukemia, ma'am. It's in an advanced stage. We estimate you have about 6 months. Ellie froze. She stared at a fixed point on the wall, a small bird-shaped patch of dampness. Not a single tear, not a single question. Do you understand what I'm telling you? I understand how much it costs me to die with dignity, Ellie replied, her voice as steady as a rock. The doctor offered chemotherapy, but Ellie shook her head. No, I don't like the thought of death catching me in a gown. 6 months is enough for what I have to do. It's more than enough. She walked back home not because she couldn't afford a ride, but because she needed to feel the city. She wanted every step to take her back to her roots, her history, her purpose. The first thing she did was go with Walter to file a preemptive complaint. They reported the forgery of her signature and the attempt to steal her property. Then they requested the temporary freezing of the bank account from which Jackson had withdrawn the money. They used a clause that allowed the stopping of financial movements if elder financial abuse was suspected. It wasn't revenge, there was no hate, it was justice. In her red notebook, she wrote, "There is no justice more complete than that which is delivered without screaming. I will watch him lose everything without lifting a finger." Ellie visited offices, made calls, and activated an international alert for Jackson's return to the United States. She wasn't going to put him in jail, but she was going to make him accountable. She even shaved her head before the chemo could take her hair. She did it in her bathroom with sewing scissors. She looked in the mirror and said, "Now I look like who I am." Meanwhile, in Rome, Jackson began to feel the first crack. He tried to pay a dinner, but his card was denied, then another, and another. He didn't know that back in South Central, his mother was weaving the last threads of a web that would return everything they had taken from her. The harvest was near, and Jackson was about to face the debris of the life he himself had destroyed.
Jackson believed that hell was a place with fire, punishment, and screams. He didn't imagine it could be as cold as the cobblestone streets of Rome, or as humiliating as a card being declined in a restaurant full of tourists. It all started with one denial at the payment terminal, then another, and another. In less than 48 hours, he found himself empty-handed, no cash, no active accounts, and with 2 women looking at him as if he were a beggar they had just picked up off the street. Tanya yelled at him in the middle of the street in front of dozens of people. "You shameless idiot! What did you do with the money? I told you not to trust your poverty-stricken mommy. Now you've screwed us all." Jackson tried to speak, but there weren't enough words to explain what he didn't even understand. He only knew something was wrong, that the accounts were frozen and he had to report to the American embassy. That night, Rhonda looked at him with pure contempt. "I warned you, Tanya. This poor boy isn't even good for washing dishes. I'm going to a hostel. I'm not sleeping in this dump." Tanya followed her. Not a word. Not a goodbye. Jackson stayed in the hotel room alone, with a half-empty suitcase and the buzz of betrayal echoing in his ears. Like a lost child, he finally dialed his mother's number. "Mom?" he said as soon as she answered. On the other end of the phone, Ellie was in her kitchen, cleaning black-eyed peas, as if nothing unusual were happening. "Mom, what did you do? They took everything from me. I'm alone. Tanya left. Rhonda, too. They say you did this." Ellie stayed silent, took a deep breath, and then replied, "I didn't take anything from you, son. I just stopped what you were taking from me." "Mom, they want to arrest me. You said you would always be there for me." "I was. Until you stopped being there for yourself. Please help me. I don't know what to do." "Learn," Ellie said, and she hung up. Jackson wandered the streets of Rome aimlessly. He slept in cheap hostels, sometimes he ate, sometimes he didn't. Finally, he took a return flight, scared, ashamed, with cold in his bones. He didn't know that upon his return, he would have to face more than just bank statements. He would have to face the ghost of the woman he had tried to erase forever. When the plane landed in the U.S., Jackson passed through customs like a ghost. No cameras, no family waiting for him, no one asking about him. He walked the streets of South Central.
Every street had an echo, a memory, a reproach. He walked toward his mother's house, but he didn't dare to knock. He just stood there, on the opposite sidewalk, watching the light in the window, the light he had tried to put out forever. Ellie settled back into her house with cracks in the walls, the same concrete floor and the rocking chair that creaked when she swayed. She recovered her peace, but not her strength. The cancer was advancing, slowly but steadily. Every week she seemed more fragile. Her clothes were too big, her hands trembled more, but she never stopped walking around her house. One Sunday morning, Jackson walked to the door. He carried a bag with donuts. He had spent the whole night wondering if he should go. He didn't expect her to open the door, he just wanted to see her, to see if she was still breathing. From the opposite sidewalk, he saw her sitting in her rocking chair. She wore an old sweater and a shawl draped over her shoulders. She smiled at some children playing nearby. Jackson didn't cross the street. He just watched her. He felt a knot in his throat, walked slowly, left the bag of donuts on the porch, and left. Over the following weeks, Jackson returned, always at the same time. He left something. Flowers, pastries, a note without a name. He never dared to knock. He never asked to enter. He had no right. One night, Ellie picked up her red notebook, opened it to the last page, and with a trembling hand wrote her last note. "My son, love is not demanded. It is given, and if you have learned that, then you are not lost anymore. Don't look for me when I'm gone. I will be in every mistake you choose not to repeat, in every act of kindness you do without expecting anything in return. If you want to forgive yourself, start with others. And if you ever manage to see your mother in the eyes of another woman, don't fail her." The morning she stopped breathing was bright. The sun streamed through the windows. On her lap was the red notebook, the envelope, and a blanket knitted by her own hands. The neighbors found her surrounded by flowers that the children had left. Her face held a serenity that few can fake. There was no drama, no screaming, just the calm after the storm. Jackson wasn't notified, but he knew. He knew the moment the wind changed and something in his chest went out. He ran to the house, saw the open door, and walked in slowly. He went to his mother's body. He knelt. He touched her hands. They were cold. Next to her, he found the envelope with his name, for Jackson. He read every word out loud, alone, in a whisper. He cried, but not like before. He cried in silence, like her. Days later, the neighbors said that the man who came with donuts stayed living in the house. He had no new furniture or luxuries, no visitors, only an old chair, a red notebook, and a photo on the shelf. Those who leave make space. Those who stay sometimes fill it with memory, and sometimes with redemption.